When Clint Eastwood returned to his quiet hometown in Northern California, he thought it would be just another visit. No cameras, no headlines, just memories. But what he found at a small-town diner left him stunned. Behind the counter, still working at 85, was his childhood best friend, a man forgotten by the world, but not by Clint. What happened next didn't make the news, but it changed lives. Because in true Clint Eastwood fashion, he didn't just recognize an old friend, he honored him. And what unfolded became a powerful lesson about dignity, loyalty, and the quiet legacy of a life well lived. The road curved gently through the Northern California hills, golden grass swaying in the wind like it had for decades. Clint Eastwood sat behind the wheel of an old Ford pickup, borrowed, not chauffeured, windows down, country air pouring in. He hadn't been back in years, maybe decades, if he was being honest. But something about this trip felt right, necessary. The documentary crew was already in town. Legacy, they were calling it. A quiet project, no fanfare, just Clint, a few cameras, and the memories of a life that stretched across almost a century. He wasn't here to talk about Hollywood. He was here to remember who he was before all of that. The town looked smaller than he remembered. It always does. The schoolhouse was still standing, though time had left its fingerprints across the brick. The barbershop, now a yoga studio. And the movie theater? Boarded up. He slowed as he passed it, the marquee faded and empty. He remembered the first film he ever saw there, black and white, dusty cowboy hats. Maybe that's where it all started. But he didn't stop until he reached a squat little building at the end of Main Street, Melba's Diner. The sign was the same, sun-bleached and barely holding on. He parked across the street and stepped out, boots hitting the pavement with that old familiar rhythm. This place hadn't changed much. The same red booths, the same creaky screen door. The smell of burnt coffee and grilled onions still clung to the walls like a second coat of paint. He used to sit at the corner booth every Saturday. Him and Walter Hayes, Walt to anyone who knew him. Back then, Walt was the fastest kid in town. First to hit a home run, first to take off running when a dare went too far. Clint used to joke that Walt didn't run on legs, he ran on rocket fuel. They'd lost touch years ago. Life had a way of pulling people in different directions. But something about this trip had stirred old thoughts, old names, old faces. He wasn't even sure why he walked through the door. Then he saw him. At first, Clint thought he was mistaken. The man behind the counter was hunched slightly, balancing a tray of coffee cups with the slow precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. His apron was stained, his shoes orthopedic, but his movements, steady, deliberate, still held the same quiet strength Clint remembered from a lifetime ago. He sat in the booth without speaking, just watched. The man moved between tables with a cloth in one hand and a pot of coffee in the other, refilling mugs, clearing plates, nodding politely, but not making much conversation, not like before. Back then, Walt's laugh used to echo off the walls of this place. Now, he just worked. Clint's eyes followed him across the room, that gait still recognizable beneath the weight of 85 years. That sharp jawline softened by time. Those hands, bigger than they should have been for a busboy, still steady as ever. It was Walt. Clint didn't move, didn't say a word. He just sat there, trying to process what he was seeing. Walt, the kid who once outran dogs and school teachers, was still here, still working, still wearing that same stubborn pride on his shoulders like it was armor. He didn't look bitter or broken, just present. Like a man who never asked for much and never expected anything more than what he could earn with his own 2 hands. Walt passed by Clint's booth with a half-full tray. He didn't look twice, didn't recognize him. Clint's throat tightened a little. He wasn't sure what hit him harder, the shock of seeing his childhood best friend after so long, or the quiet realization that Walt had been here this whole time, unseen, unnoticed, still carrying plates while the rest of the world moved on. He waited until Walt turned again. This time, their eyes met, briefly, then passed. No flicker of recognition. Clint sat back, exhaled through his nose, and nodded to himself. He wasn't leaving, not yet. Not until he talked to the man behind the apron. The diner's chatter faded behind Clint as he slowly rose from the booth. His boots tapped softly against the worn linoleum floor as he made his way toward the man carrying a half-cleared tray of plates. Walt didn't notice him at first, too focused on scraping leftover fries into a bus tub, the kind of job most would overlook, but Walt still gave it care. Clint stopped just a few feet away. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke, voice low but warm. "Walt?" Walt looked up, brow furrowing slightly as he took in the tall, weathered man standing before him. For a second, his expression was blank, searching. Then his eyes narrowed just slightly, not in suspicion, but recognition clawing its way through the years. Clint gave a small smile. "Clint Eastwood." Walt froze. The tray in his hands tilted slightly before he caught it. His mouth parted, eyes wide now. Then, slowly, like the memory was blooming right there in front of him, he set the tray down and took a step closer. "Clint," he said, quieter this time, then again, louder. "Clint Eastwood?" They stood there for a moment, two men separated by time, but bridged by something deeper. Then Walt's hand extended, but Clint pulled him in instead. Their handshake turned into a hug. It wasn't dramatic. No music swelled. No one clapped. But for the handful of diners watching, the moment felt sacred. Two old friends, finding their way back. They sat in the same booth they used to fight over as boys. Clint waved off the waitress. "Just coffee," he said. "We've got catching up to do." And they did. Stories poured out like they'd been bottled for too long. Fishing rods snapped in half. Summer days at the creek. High school dances they didn't quite have the guts to go to. Back then, Clint and Walt were inseparable. Two kids with big dreams and no clue how big the world really was. But as the conversation deepened, the laughter softened. Because not all memories were light. Not all roads led to the same place. The coffee had gone cold. Neither of them noticed. The laughter had faded, and in its place sat something quieter. The kind of silence only two men who'd lived full lives could share. Walt leaned back in the booth, hands folded, eyes drifting toward the window where sunlight spilled across the Formica table. "You ever think," he said, "how things might have gone if we'd both left?" Clint looked at him for a long moment. "I have." Walt chuckled, shaking his head. "You were always going to leave, even back then. You had that look." "What look?" "That look that says, 'I'm not staying here.' Most of us don't get that look. We just stay." Clint didn't argue. He couldn't. Walt told him how he'd taken a job at the mill right after high school. His dad got sick, and someone had to bring money in. Then the kids came, 3 of them. He smiled when he said it, proud, not bitter. "Missed a lot of chances," Walt said, "but I never missed dinner." There was no self-pity in his voice, no envy, just fact. Clint's world had been sound stages and scripts, Oscars and directors' chairs. Walt's world had been shift changes and school lunches, roof repairs and doctor's bills. The fork in their lives hadn't come from a single decision. It had been slow, silent, shaped by things beyond their control. "There were places I couldn't go," Walt said, voice even. Not back then, not as a black kid from a no-name town. I wasn't bitter about it, just knew the rules. My father told me, "You don't have to like the game, but you better know how it's played." Clint leaned forward, elbows on the table. "You ever regret staying?" Walt shrugged. "Nah. You got famous. I got steady. That's a different kind of rich." Clint smiled, but something in his chest tightened. He saw the quiet weight Walt carried, not because he failed, but because the world was never built to give him the chance. Walt sipped the last of his coffee and set the mug down. "Work is work," he said, as if that explained everything, long as it's honest. Clint didn't answer, he just nodded, but his mind was already turning, because now he wasn't just remembering. Now he was planning. They didn't make a plan, didn't need one. After breakfast, they stepped out into the soft California light and just started walking like they used to, back when a full Saturday meant dirt on your jeans and scrapes on your elbows. The town had aged, but in many ways it still wore the same face, just with more wrinkles. The first stop was the old baseball field, now barely more than a patch of grass behind the rec center. The chain-link fence was rusted, the dugouts tagged with graffiti. But Clint could still see it. Walt stealing second base, dust flying behind him, grinning like a bandit who just got away with it. "You remember that home run I hit off Bobby Myers?" Walt asked, nudging him. Clint smirked. "You mean the one that hit the principal's windshield?" Walt laughed. "Man, I ran like hell." They walked on, reaching the abandoned movie house. The marquee still hung there, letters long gone. The double doors were boarded shut, paint peeling from every edge. "This is where I saw High Noon," Clint said softly. "Changed everything." Walt didn't say anything, just looked at the building for a long while. Their last stop was the street they grew up on, now quieter, smaller. Some of the houses had fresh paint. Others looked forgotten. Clint paused in front of a white house with a sagging porch. "You still here?" he asked. "Been here 60 years, Walt said. "Longer than any mortgage." Clint looked around. His hands rested on his hips. He didn't say anything right away, but Walt caught the shift in his posture, the way his mouth tightened just slightly, like he was chewing on a thought too big to swallow. "You're thinking about the difference," Walt said. Clint met his eyes. "I went to studios. You went to the mill. I got a star on the Walk of Fame. You're still wiping tables at 85. Walt gave a small shrug, not defensive, just honest. "Don't get me wrong, Clint. I see it too. I just don't carry it the way you do." He turned, nodding toward the porch. "I've had a good life. Wouldn't trade it for anything." Clint didn't respond right away, but the silence between them said plenty. They sat on Walt's porch as the afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the faded steps. Clint leaned back in a creaky chair that had seen better days. Walt sat across from him, a glass of sweet tea in one hand, the other resting lightly on his knee. No cameras, no scripts. Just the rhythm of wind through trees and the slow settling of old bones. "You still working full-time?" Clint finally asked. Walt smiled without looking up. 5 days a week, sometimes 6 if Manny needs me on a Sunday shift." Clint frowned. "At 85? Walt chuckled. "My knees remind me every morning, believe me." He took a sip of tea. "When Lorraine passed, it got quiet real fast around here. Work kept the gears turning, kept me moving forward." Clint's gaze dropped. "I didn't know she was gone." "Cancer," Walt said. "Quick, but not painless. That woman fought. Even at the end, she was more worried about me than herself." He paused, eyes glazing a bit. "We were married 60 years. She used to sit right where you are, told me I made the worst tea in California." Clint gave a soft laugh. "She was probably right." Walt smiled. "I never argued." He talked about his kids, one in Atlanta, one still nearby, one serving overseas, grandkids too. Photos lined the windowsill, not posed or perfect, but real. Candidate. Laughter caught mid-frame. "They all wanted me to retire," Walt said. I told them, "Retire into what? Daytime television and a slow death?" "Nah, I'd rather wipe down tables and earn my keep." Clint looked at him, eyebrows furrowed. "You really don't ever get tired of it?" "Oh, I get tired," Walt said, "but tired ain't the same as done." He leaned forward, voice a little quieter now. "Retirement? That's for rich folks. I don't need yachts or country clubs. I just want to be useful." Clint felt that, deep in his gut. In a world chasing headlines and hashtags, here was a man who measured his life in family dinners, calloused hands, and honest work. Walt Hayes hadn't just aged with dignity, he'd carried it like armor. And in that moment, Clint wasn't just proud to know him, he was humbled by him. Back in Los Angeles, the city moved like it always did. Fast, loud, and a little too proud of itself. But Clint wasn't paying attention to any of it. He sat in his home office, a legal pad in front of him, phone pressed to his ear. The pen tapped against the desk in a slow, steady rhythm, like a ticking clock only he could hear. "Yeah, I need the full team on this," he said into the phone. "No press. Not yet. Just get me what I asked for." The call ended. He made another, then another. Something was gnawing at him. Not guilt. Walt never asked for pity, but respect. And Clint couldn't get the image out of his head. The strongest kid he ever knew, still working shifts at 85, still wiping tables with dignity while the world walked by without looking twice. Walt had never complained, but that didn't mean Clint couldn't do something. He spoke to a lawyer he trusted, spoke to the head of a foundation he'd quietly funded for years, reached out to a friend in the mayor's office of Walt's small town. "Nothing flashy," Clint said, "just right." He stayed up late into the night, going over old letters, photos, and paperwork. A few of the production crew from the documentary offered to help. Clint didn't say much, just nodded and handed them a list. By the end of the week, the plan was ready. It wasn't about charity, it wasn't about making headlines, it was about giving back to a man who never asked for anything. And so, a week later, Clint climbed back into that same old pickup truck, pointed it north toward a quiet California town, and brought with him something that couldn't be wrapped or measured. He brought a reckoning, one Walt never saw coming. The bell over the diner door jingled just like it always did. Walt looked up from the bus tub, mid-wipe, his apron dusted with flour and age. He saw Clint walk in again, this time not alone. Behind him came two cameramen, a pair of sharply dressed individuals with clipboards and, surprisingly, the town's mayor. Walt blinked. "Clint?" Clint smiled. "Hey, Walt. Mind if we crash your shift?" Walt looked around. Something was off. The diner, usually half full and humming, was packed. Locals from every part of town filled the booths, families, retirees, even a few kids from the high school baseball team in their uniforms. The energy was electric, expectant, like they all knew something he didn't. Behind the counter, the diner owner, a woman named Marlene who had run the place for 20 years, gave Walt a quiet nod. "Just roll with it," she whispered. Clint stepped forward. The camera crew stayed respectful, keeping a few feet back. This wasn't a tabloid ambush, it felt more like a ceremony. Walt folded his towel slowly, unsure whether to stand still or keep working. "Walt Hayes," Clint said, his voice echoing through the suddenly quiet diner. "This town knows who you are, but I don't think they know enough." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "You've spent your whole life serving people, in this diner, in your home, in your community, and you've never once asked for anything in return." Walt's jaw tightened. His hands were still. He looked around. Every eye in the place was on him. Clint took a breath. "Well, today, we're returning the favor." From the back, a woman walked forward with a framed certificate. Another man followed, holding an envelope. And then came the final surprise. A banner unfurled from the ceiling, reading, "The Walt Hayes Honorary Community Fund, for service with dignity." Walt stared at it, stunned. Clint stepped closer. "We started a scholarship in your name, covered your bills, set up your retirement. But more than that, we're putting your story on the record. Because people like you, Walt, you're what this country's built on, and it's damn time someone said it out loud." The room erupted in applause. Walt didn't move, not at first. Then quietly his eyes welled, and for once the man who had carried everything alone let a little of the weight fall away. The applause eventually quieted, but the energy in the room stayed charged, like everyone there knew they were witnessing something they'd tell their grandkids about one day. Clint stepped back up to the small platform the diner had hastily cleared near the jukebox. He took a folded paper from his jacket, but after a pause, he didn't open it. Instead, he looked at Walt, the same kid who once taught him how to spit sunflower seeds, now standing at 85 with tears in his eyes and a room full of people finally seeing him. Clint cleared his throat. "I've given a lot of speeches in my time, on movie sets, on stages, even behind a president once, but none of them ever meant as much to me as this one." The room was silent. Walter Hayes isn't famous. He never asked to be. He didn't make his living in front of cameras. He made it in back kitchens, factory lines, church pews, and front porches. He raised a family. He served his community. He showed up every day. Walt's head was down now, eyes glassy. Clint continued, "We spend so much time glorifying the loudest people in the room, we forget about the ones who build the floor it stands on. Walt is one of those people. And I'm here today to say what doesn't get said enough. Thank you." He turned to face the crowd. "I've partnered with local leaders and my own foundation to start the Walt Hayes Fund. It'll cover Walt's retirement, his health care, and every year we'll give a scholarship in his name to a student in this town who shows the same grit, kindness, and dignity he's shown every day of his life." The room was frozen. Then came the sound of one fork gently clinking a plate, and the moment cracked. Applause thundered. Some stood, some cried. A few who'd never even spoken to Walt suddenly realized they had been in the presence of greatness all along. Clint walked over, placed a hand on Walt's shoulder. Walt tried to speak, but no words came, just tears. And in that silence, everyone understood what real gratitude looked like. The porch creaked gently beneath their chairs as the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long golden rays across the grass. Walt sat in his usual spot, a soft blanket over his knees, a mug of coffee cooling on the rail. Clint sat beside him, leaning back, arms folded, boots crossed at the ankle. No cameras, no headlines, just two old friends watching the world slow down. The community center across town now bore a new name, the Walt Hayes Youth Center. Kids ran in and out every day, backpacks bouncing, sneakers squeaking on the gym floor. And inside, most afternoons, Walt was there, not as a janitor or a busboy, but as a mentor, a quiet presence, a steady hand. He didn't talk much about what happened that day in the diner. When people brought it up, he just smiled and said, "Wasn't about me. It was about reminding folks what matters." But something changed. He stood a little taller now, walked with his head just a little higher. And Clint, he kept visiting, sometimes with a fresh thermos of coffee, sometimes with nothing at all. Just stories, just time. They talked about old movies, new kids, big things, small ones, and sometimes they didn't talk at all, just sat. The scholarship had already gone to its first recipient, a young girl with a passion for engineering and a part-time job helping her mom clean houses. Walt said she reminded him of someone. Clint said, "She reminds me of you." On one quiet Friday afternoon, as the cicadas hummed and the sun turned the sky into honey, Clint leaned back and looked out over the yard. Then came the voiceover, soft, steady, unmistakably Clint. "Sometimes the greatest men don't live in the spotlight, but in the hearts of those who watch them quietly, do the right thing every single day." The screen slowly faded to black, and in that stillness, before the credits rolled, there was only the sound of two rocking chairs creaking side by side, like they'd always been. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more shocking.